There are women who love loudly. They announce their love with gifts and grand gestures and long speeches at family gatherings. And then there are women who love the way the roots of a tree love the ground, silently, completely, without ever asking to be seen. Grace was that second kind of woman. She raised Adaeze in a small rented flat in Enugu, in a building where the ceiling leaked every rainy season, and the landlord came knocking on the first of every month without fail. Grace worked as a seamstress. She woke before the sun and slept long after it had gone. She sewed other women's wedding dresses and christening gowns and burial clothes, and through the eye of every needle she threaded not just cotton, but hope. The specific hope of a mother who has decided that her daughter will not know the same struggle. Adaize's father had left when Adaeze was 4 years old. She barely remembered his face. What she remembered instead was her mother's face, the way it looked in the early morning light as Grace braided her hair before school, humming quietly, fingers moving with practiced love. What she remembered was the smell of her mother's skin, something warm and faintly floral, and the sound of the old sewing machine running through the night like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Grace never remarried. People asked her why. Neighbors, church women, distant relatives who came around during Christmas and felt entitled to opinions about her life. Grace would smile at all of them with the same gentle patience and say the same thing every time. I am not lonely. I have my daughter, and God has never left this house. Adaeze grew up believing that. She grew up watching her mother move through hardship with a grace that matched her name. Never bitter, never defeated, always finding something to be grateful for even in the narrowest of circumstances. If there was only one piece of fish in the pot, Grace would put it in Adaeze's plate and eat the soup alone, saying she preferred it that way. If Adaeze came home from school crying because a classmate had mocked her worn uniform, Grace would pull her close and whisper into her hair that the same God who dressed the flowers of the field had already prepared something beautiful for her. By the time Adaeze sat for her final exams and passed well enough to enter the University of Nigeria in Nsukka, Grace wept tears she tried to hide and failed completely. She sold 2 of her best sewing machines to pay the first year's fees. She told Adaeze it was an investment, that she was not spending money, but planting something that would grow. She was right. Adaeze studied accounting, graduated with a second-class upper, found work at a small firm in Abuja, and within 3 years had built herself a quiet, steady life. A rented apartment in Karu, a second-hand car that gave her less trouble than she expected, a small amount of savings she was learning to grow. And then she met Kenneth. Kenneth Okafor was charming in the particular way that certain men are charming, effortlessly, dangerously, in a way that made you feel chosen simply because his attention had landed on you. He was tall, well-dressed, and worked in logistics in Abuja. He laughed easily. He remembered small things, the name of the restaurant where you had your first conversation, the song that was playing when you told him something important, the exact way you liked your tea. Adaeze was not naive. She had watched her mother navigate life alone and understood that charm was not character. She took her time. She observed Kenneth across many months and many circumstances before she allowed herself to fall. She watched how he spoke to waiters, how he treated people who could do nothing for him. She asked God to show her clearly if this was the wrong road. What she did not know how to watch for was his mother. Mrs. Okafor lived in a large compound in Lekki, Lagos, in a house that Kenneth's father had built before he died, and that she had since expanded and filled with the specific energy of a woman who had decided that her son was her greatest achievement and her greatest possession. She was not an openly cruel woman, not at first. She was the kind of woman who expressed her control through warmth, through overwhelming generosity that came attached to invisible strings. When Kenneth brought Adaeze home for the first time, Mrs. Okafor received her with food and laughter and the warmth of a woman genuinely welcoming a daughter. She complimented Adaeze's appearance. She praised her manners. She sat with her in the kitchen and asked her questions with the attentiveness of a woman truly interested in the answers. Only later would Adaeze understand that every answer she gave that day was being filed carefully, weaknesses noted, pressure points identified, the full map of her vulnerabilities being drawn by hands wrapped in the warmest of smiles. Grace met Mrs. Okafor once before the wedding. She came back from that visit quiet. Adaeze asked her what she thought. Grace took a long time to answer. Then she said, "The house is very beautiful. The woman knows how to build things to look a certain way." Adaeze took that as approval. It was a warning she was not yet equipped to understand. The wedding was held in Abuja on a bright Saturday in November. Grace wore a deep burgundy lace that Adaeze had bought for her. She danced at the reception with the kind of joy that comes not from the occasion, but from the person. She was not dancing because there was a wedding. She was dancing because her daughter was happy. When she held Adaeze during the mother and daughter dance, she held her the way she always had, completely, as if her arms were built specifically for that purpose. She whispered into Adaeze's ear, "No matter where life takes you, I am always with you. Always. Do you hear me?" Adaeze laughed and said, "Mommy, you are not going anywhere." Grace pulled back and looked at her daughter with eyes that held something Adaeze could not name at the time, something that felt like knowing. "No," Grace said, "I am not going anywhere." 14 months later, Grace collapsed in her small flat in Enugu. A stroke, the doctor said, massive and sudden. She was gone before the ambulance reached the hospital. Adaeze did not eat for 4 days. Grief does strange things to a marriage. It can pull two people together, fusing them in shared tenderness, or it can reveal the cracks that were always there, the ones that comfort and routine had been quietly covering. What grief revealed in Kenneth was distance. He did not know how to hold pain that was not his own. He had not lost a parent. He still had his mother, large, present, filling every room she entered. When Adaeze wept, Kenneth sat beside her with the discomfort of a man who wants the weeping to stop but does not know how to make it stop. He offered the right things in the wrong tone. He offered solutions when she needed presence. When she wanted to talk about Grace, he would listen for a few minutes and then gently redirect to bills, to logistics, to practical things, to the world continuing to turn whether or not you wanted it to. Sandra, Kenneth's younger sister, visited them in Abuja one weekend and pulled Adaeze aside while Kenneth was in the bathroom. "My mother calls him every night," Sandra said quietly. "She tells him things about you." "What things?" Adaeze asked. Sandra looked at the closed bathroom door. "That you are too focused on your grief, that a good wife should be focused on her husband by now, that your mother's people will come and take everything from this marriage." She paused. "I am telling you so you can prepare, not so you can fight. There is no winning a direct fight with my mother." Adaeze thanked her. She tried to prepare. She cooked more. She asked Kenneth about his days with greater intention. She initiated conversations about their future. Children, a home they would buy together, the life they had promised each other. Kenneth participated in these conversations with the surface of his presence, while something deeper was already pulling away. The first time Mrs. Okafor came to stay with them for 2 weeks, Adaeze told herself it was normal. Mothers visited. She cooked for her mother-in-law, cleaned around her, deferred to her in her own home with the patience of a woman determined to make things work. Mrs. Okafor was pleasant throughout. But when she left, she took something with her. Adaize could feel it absent without being able to name it. Some small remaining warmth in Kenneth had been lifted out of the apartment and placed somewhere else. It was a Thursday night in March, 14 months after Grace's death, when Adaize first dreamt of her mother. She had dreamt of Grace before. Scattered, formless dreams where her mother appeared briefly and then dissolved, the way grief dreams often do. But this one was different. This one had weight. In the dream, Adaize was sitting in the small flat in Enugu where she had grown up. The ceiling was not leaking. The room was filled with a warm golden light that had no source she could identify. It simply was, the way warmth simply is. Grace was sitting across from her at the small kitchen table, wearing the burgundy lace from the wedding. She looked exactly as she had looked that day. Her eyes were clear and calm and full. She did not speak immediately. She simply looked at Adaize the way she always had, completely, as if looking at her daughter itself was a form of rest. Then she said, "There is something hidden in the blue box." Adaize said, "What blue box, Mommy?" Grace said, "The one I kept under the bed. You packed everything when you cleaned out the flat. It came with you. You put it in the back of your wardrobe and forgot about it because the grief was too heavy." Adaize said, "I don't remember a blue box." Grace smiled. "You will remember when you wake up, and when you find it, read everything inside it. Every single paper. Do not skip anything." Then the warmth intensified, and Grace began to recede. Not disappearing, but simply becoming part of the light, the way a candle becomes part of the room it illuminates. Adaize woke at 3:14 in the morning. Kenneth was asleep beside her. She lay still for a long moment, her heart doing something she could not name. Not quite fear, not quite hope, something between the two. Then she got up. She went to the wardrobe. She moved things aside, shoes, bags, a folded blanket, boxes she had not opened since the move. And at the very back, pushed so far it was nearly invisible, was a rectangular tin box, painted a faded blue with small yellow flowers on the lid. She carried it to the living room. She sat on the floor. She opened it. Inside was a life she had not known her mother was building. There were property documents. Grace had, over many years of quiet saving, purchased a small plot of land in a developing area outside Enugu. It was not large, but the receipt was there, and the survey document and the deed of ownership all in Grace's name, with a handwritten note paper-clipped to the front that said simply, "For Adaize, when the time is right." There were also bank documents, a separate savings account Adaize had not known about, opened in both their names, Grace's and Adaize's, as joint holders. The balance was not a fortune, but it was significant. 14 years of threading needles through the night, saved coin by coin, accumulated with the patience of a woman who knew exactly what she was building toward, even when no one else could see it. There was a letter. 3 pages, handwritten, in Grace's careful looping script. Adaize read it with her knees pulled to her chest and tears falling so quietly she barely noticed them. The letter began, "My Adaize, if you are reading this, then I have gone ahead to rest. Do not be afraid. I prepared this for you because I am your mother, and a mother prepares. I do not know what your life will look like when this finds you, but I know this. Whatever is happening, you are stronger than it. You are made from my strength and from God's grace and from 14 years of a mother who refused to let difficulty be the final word." The letter went on to describe the land, the account, the contacts needed to access both. It gave instructions with the specificity of a woman who trusted no one else to handle her daughter's welfare. And near the end, the letter had written something that made Adaize stop breathing for a full moment. I met his mother, my daughter. I smiled because I am a woman of peace. But I watched her eyes and I understood the kind of woman she is. I cannot tell you what your marriage will become. Only God holds those days. But I can tell you this. Whatever happens, you will not be left with nothing. I made sure of it. A mother who loves her child does not wait to see what the world will do. She prepares the ground before the storm arrives. Adaeze sat on the floor of her living room until the sun came up. She did not wake Kenneth. She simply sat with her mother's love, which had crossed from wherever Grace now lived and landed in this room, on this floor, in this exact moment when it was needed most.
Before we continue to the most powerful part of this story, we need to ask you something. If this story has already moved you, if you felt Grace's love through that screen, if you found yourself holding your breath in that living room at 3:14 in the morning with Adaeze, then you already know this channel is something different. We don't just tell stories here. We tell the stories that stay with you, the ones you think about on your way to work, the ones you replay in your mind at night, the ones that remind you that love does not end, that strength is always being built in secret, and that the right moment always comes. If that means something to you, please subscribe right now. Hit that bell so you never miss a story, and share this with someone who needs to hear that they are not alone. This channel is growing because of people like you, people who believe that African stories deserve to be told with this kind of depth and power. Now, let us finish what Grace started. 3 weeks after Adaeze found the blue box, everything in her marriage came apart at once. It did not happen slowly, the way she had expected bad things to happen. It happened in a single afternoon, loud and final, like a building that has been cracking for years and then simply decides to fall. Kenneth came home from work on a Friday, carrying the specific energy of a man who has been convinced of something and has arrived to deliver it. He sat across from Adaeze in their living room, with his hands clasped and his eyes looking somewhere just past her face, and he told her that he thought they should separate. He used careful language. He said things like, "We want different things, and I need space to figure out who I am, and this isn't working for either of us." He said it all in a measured tone that told Adaeze these were not his words. These were words that had been arranged for him by someone who understood that the right language makes cruelty sound reasonable. Adaeze looked at him for a long time. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at the man she had agreed to build a life with. "Did your mother call you today?" she asked. Kenneth's eyes shifted, just slightly, but she caught it. "Kenneth," Adaeze said quietly, "when did you stop being able to tell the truth?" He raised his voice then, said she was always blaming her mother, always making everything about his family, never taking responsibility for her own contribution to the problems. He said things that had clearly been saved up, organized, rehearsed, a list of grievances that were too neatly structured to have been assembled alone. Adaeze let him finish. Then she said, "I'm not going to fight you, but I am not leaving this apartment. My name is on this list too." He left for Lagos that same evening. He went to his mother's house in Lekki. Mrs. Okafor called Adaeze 2 days later. The call was brief and to the point. She said that Kenneth had made his decision. She said that it would be best for everyone if Adaeze accepted it with dignity. She said that she was sure a woman of Adaeze's caliber would find her feet quickly. She said all of this in the warm, reasonable voice of a woman doing Adaeze a favor. At the very end of the call, when Adaeze had said almost nothing, Mrs. Okafor said, "I hope you understand there are no hard feelings. It simply wasn't meant to be." "No hard feelings," Adaeze agreed. "I understand completely." She ended the call. She sat still for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called the lawyer in Enugu, whose name her mother had written in the letter. The lawyer's name was Mr. Chukwu. He was a quiet, precise man in his 60s who had known Grace from the church choir for nearly 20 years. When Adaeze called, he said he had been expecting to hear from her. Grace had told him that when the time came, her daughter would call. She drove to Enugu the following weekend. She sat in Mr. Chukwu's small office and he placed the sealed envelope on the table between them and let her open it herself. What was inside that envelope was the full picture of everything Grace had quietly built. The land outside Enugu had appreciated significantly. The area had developed faster than anyone had predicted, and what Grace had purchased for a modest price was now worth nearly 4 times what she had paid for. Mr. Chukwu had been monitoring it on Grace's instruction, and he had, with the authority Grace had given him in a signed document, arranged for a modest structure to be built on the property, a small block of 4 rental units that had been generating quiet monthly income for the past 2 years. That income had been accumulating in the joint account. Grace had also, through Mr. Chukwu, registered a small business in Adaize's name, a tailoring and fashion collective that Grace had conceptualized using everything she knew about the industry, designed as something Adaize could grow if she ever chose to. The registration was done, the business name was secured, the initial supplier contacts were documented. All of it prepared, all of it waiting in patient trust by a man who promised a dying woman he would keep her daughter's inheritance safe until it was needed. When Adaize finished reading through everything, she looked up at Mr. Chukwu and could not speak for a moment. He said quietly, "She came to me about 2 years before she died. She said she didn't know what was coming, but she wanted to make sure that whatever came, Adaize would be ready." She said he paused, looked at his hands. She said, "A mother's love doesn't stop working just because the mother stops breathing." Adaize pressed both hands to her mouth. She held herself together by pure will. Then she straightened. She wiped her eyes once and she said, "What do I need to do first?" What happened next did not happen overnight. Adaize was not the kind of woman who confused speed with strength. She moved carefully and completely, like her mother had always moved, quietly, thoroughly, building things that would last. She accessed the joint account, she engaged an estate agent, and began working with Mr. Chukwu to properly manage the rental units. She took a week of leave from her job and drove around the land, walked its perimeter, stood on it, and felt under her feet the ground that her mother had purchased on the long short faith that her daughter would one day need it. She stood there in the early morning light and said out loud to no one visible and to someone very present, "I see you, Mommy. I see everything you did." She began building the fashion collective slowly on weekends and evenings, using Grace's supplier contacts and her own accounting expertise to structure it properly from the beginning. She found 3 young seamstresses in Enugu who were talented and underutilized. She offered them structure and fair pay. She designed the collective's identity around her mother's approach: quality over speed, dignity in every stitch, work that told the truth about the woman wearing it. Within 8 months, the collective had its first commercial order. A small hotel in Enugu commissioned uniforms. It was not glamorous, it was a beginning. Her job in Abuja continued. She was promoted, a supervisor now, managing a team of 5. Her boss noted that she had developed a particular quality in her work in the past year, something steadier and more assured than before. She did not flinch. She did not plead. She did not beg. She did not break. To Kenneth and Mommy, she simply became a woman who was too busy to be broken down. That was the first step of Grace's last plan. The first box and the things inside were the foundation, and the next 3 boxes, the land, the money, and the business, were the framework of a new life waiting to be built. But there was still one more box, the black box, the one that Grace had said she hoped Adaize would never need. And indeed, the first 3 boxes were already changing the course of Adaize's life, causing a different kind of fight for husband and the woman who controlled him. And as we know from history, a fight for freedom always assembles its enemies.
Not explained that grief and betrayal had done what comfort never could. They had stripped away every remaining softness that was not real, leaving only the core of who she was, which turned out to be more than enough. The divorce went through without drama. Adaize engaged her own lawyer, a sharp young woman from Abuja who handled everything efficiently. There was no property dispute. They had not yet bought the home they had planned to buy together, and the apartment lease was ending. Kenneth, through his lawyer, attempted to make several demands that Adaize's lawyer addressed with calm precision. There was nothing to give him that he had not already taken. He received the divorce and was left holding the space where a marriage used to be. Adeze moved to Enugu. She rented a clean, bright apartment in a good area. She filled it with light and plants and the sound of her own life. She hung a photograph of Grace on the wall in the living room. Not in the corner, not tucked away, right at the center, where she could see it from everywhere in the room. She talked to her mother every morning. She did not think this was strange. She thought it was necessary. It was 18 months after the divorce when Sandra came. She did not call ahead. She appeared at Adeze's door on a Tuesday evening, carrying a bag and the expression of someone who has been rehearsing an apology for a very long time and is now afraid to deliver it. Adeze opened the door and looked at her for a long moment. Then she stepped back and let her in. Sandra sat in the living room and her eyes went immediately to Grace's photograph on the wall. Something moved across her face, shame or recognition or both. She said, "I owe you the truth. I have owed you it for a long time." Adeze sat across from her. "Then give it to me." Sandra told her everything. She told her that Mrs. Okafor had been building her case against Adeze from the first week of the marriage, cataloging perceived faults, constructing narratives for Kenneth's consumption, systematically positioning Adeze as an obstacle to his happiness rather than the source of it. She told her that Kenneth had not been entirely passive, that he had been a willing listener, that some part of him needed the permission his mother gave him to be less than what he had promised to be. She told Adeze that after the divorce, things in the Okafor house had not improved. Kenneth had started a relationship with a woman his mother had introduced, a woman specifically selected for her family connections and her compliance, and that the relationship had already begun to fracture under the same pressures that had destroyed the first one, because the problem in the Okafor house was never the wife. She told Adeze that Kenneth had said her name recently, in the middle of a fight with his new partner, that he had said, not loudly, almost to himself, Adeze would not have done this. Adeze listened to all of it. She did not allow herself to feel the satisfaction of it immediately. She held it carefully, examined it, let it settle. Then she said, "Why are you telling me this now?" Sandra looked at her hands. "Because I was wrong. Because I stood at that door and told you to go when I should have opened it. Because I watched what my mother did and I said nothing, and I have lived with that every single day." She looked up. "And because I looked at what your life has become and what my brother's life has become, I wanted you to know that someone in that family sees it clearly." Adeze looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "I forgive you, Sandra. Not because it costs me nothing. It costs me something. But because carrying on forgiveness is heavy, and I am no longer interested in carrying heavy things." Sandra pressed her mouth to her mouth. Adeze continued, "But I need you to understand something. Your forgiveness does not reopen a door. It simply means I release the debt. Your brother made his choice, your mother made hers, and mine turned out to be the right one." Kenneth's mother came 3 months after Sandra. She came with a driver and a wrapped gift and the specific posture of a woman who has prepared herself for a difficult conversation and intends to conduct it on her own terms. Adeze received her at the door. She did not invite her in immediately. She simply looked at her with the calm, level eyes of a woman who had nothing left to lose and therefore had become entirely free. Mrs. Okafor said, "I know we have had difficulties. I am here because Kenneth is not well. He is suffering, and I believe part of it is because of how things ended between you. I want to discuss the possibility." "Mrs. Okafor," Adeze said, not unkindly, "I'm going to stop you there." Mrs. Okafor blinked. Adeze said, "I know why you are here. You are here because things have not gone the way you planned. The new woman has not become what you hoped. Kenneth is unhappy, and you have decided that the unhappiness is a problem I can solve." Mrs. Okafor began to speak. Adeze continued, "You came to my home once, the home that was mine, and you told me through a gate in the rain that I had nothing there anymore. You were right, I had nothing there. But you did not understand that the nothing was not a punishment, it was a beginning. She paused. Let the silence be full for a moment. My mother left me something, Mrs. Okafor. She left me land and income and a business and every tool I needed to build my own life. She left them before she died, before I was married, before any of this happened. Because she was a mother who loved her child completely, and that kind of love plans ahead. It reaches forward. It reaches, if necessary, from wherever it goes. She looked at the woman in front of her, at the expensive clothes, the composed face, the gift still held in both hands, and she felt with great clarity that she owed this woman nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even the dignity of a dramatic speech. I pray Kenneth finds peace. I genuinely mean that. But I am not the one who can give it to him. You raised him to need something from others that he should have been taught to find in himself. That is not a wound I can close. She stepped back. She began to close the door. Mrs. Okafor, Adeze said, God bless you. Simply. And she closed the door. She stood with her back against it for a moment. Then she looked up at Grace's photograph across the room. The light coming through the window landed on it at an angle that made it glow. Adeze smiled. I heard you, Mommy, she said softly. From the very beginning you were telling me. I just needed time to understand. There's a version of this story that ends with Adeze wealthy and powerful and completely untouched. The kind of ending that feels satisfying but false. Because real women survive real pain, do not come through it untouched. They come through it transformed, which is something deeper and more honest than simply winning. Adeze was transformed. She carried her grief for her mother the way you carry something precious that is also heavy. Carefully always, never setting it down completely, but learning over time to carry it without being bent by it. She spoke about Grace often, to the seamstresses in her collective, to the young women who came to her for advice, to anyone who asked how she had built what she built. She always told the truth. She had not built it alone. The foundation had been laid by a woman with a sewing machine and a blue box and a love that did not know how to stop working. The fashion collective grew. By the end of the second year, it had 12 staff members, a workshop space in a clean part of Enugu, and a client list that had expanded from hotels to corporate accounts to individual commissions from women in Lagos and Abuja who had heard about the work and wanted it. It was not a fashion empire, not yet, but it was something real and growing, rooted in quality and in the specific intention of a mother who had seen it all before it existed. The land continued to appreciate. The rental units were expanded to 8. Adeze hired a property manager and turned her attention fully to the collective. She did not remarry quickly. She dated, eventually, with the careful discernment of a woman who has learned exactly what she is worth and is no longer willing to accept anything that falls short of it. She found in time a quiet man who had built his own life with his own hands and who looked at her with the specific regard of someone who recognizes substance when he sees it. He met Grace through the photograph. Adeze introduced them the first time he came to the apartment, pointed to the picture on the wall and said, "That is my mother. She is the reason everything in this room exists. I need you to understand that before we go any further." He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he said, "She looks like a woman who loved very well." Adeze said, "She loved better than anyone I have ever known." Kenneth Okafor eventually left Lagos. The second relationship dissolved in the same way the first had, for the same reasons. Not because the women were wrong, but because the ground had never been prepared. He took a job in Port Harcourt and quietly disappeared from the social circles where people still talked about Adaeze's rise and wondered, in the private way that the guilty wonder, whether things could have gone differently. Mrs. Okafor grew older in her large house in Lekki. The compound that had once been full of activity became quieter. Sandra visited when she could, but she lived her own life now, away from the gravity of her mother's control. The gift that Mrs. Okafor had brought to Adaize's door was never received. She drove home with it still in her lap, and what she felt on that drive was something she never named out loud, but it was the specific weight of a woman who built the wrong things with her love and is only now beginning to understand the cost. Final words. On the anniversary of Grace's death, Adaize went back to Enugu. She went to the land. She walked to the center of it, past the rental units, past the workers, into the open space at the heart of it where the grass grew long and the morning light came through clean and unobstructed. She stood there and she was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke to the air, which she had learned was not empty. "I found the blue box, Mommy. I read every paper. I talked to Mr. Chukwu. I did everything you prepared, and I want you to know wherever you are that it worked. All of it worked. Not just the land and the money and the business. The love. That worked most of all." The wind moved through the grass. A bird called somewhere in the trees at the edge of the property. Adaize closed her eyes, and just for a moment, in the warmth on her face, in the solid ground under her feet, in the absolute certainty that she was not standing there alone, she felt it. Her mother's love, reaching her from wherever love goes when its owner leaves. Still warm, still complete, still exactly what she needed. A mother who loves her child does not stop working just because she stops breathing. Grace had said so. Grace had proven it. And Adaize, standing on her own land, in her own life, with her own name, was the living evidence of everything a mother's love can build when it is deep enough, patient enough, and brave enough to prepare for storms it prays will never come. If this story moved you, if you felt grace in that blue box, if you held your breath at that gate in the rain, if you carried something home from this story that you didn't have before, then you already know what this channel is. We tell the stories that stay, the ones that remind you that love is the most powerful force in any room, even the rooms it has already left. Subscribe right now and support this growing channel. Every subscriber tells us that these stories matter, that African voices, African love, and African strength deserve to be told with this kind of depth and care. Hit the bell and share this with someone who needs it today. And drop a comment. Tell us, did Grace's love reach you too? God bless every single one of you. We will see you in the next story. Written with love, in honor of every mother who prepared the ground before the storm arrived.